The room fell silent the moment I said it. Not the kind of polite silence people ignore, but the kind that feels heavy and hard to miss. My husband blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. His mother stopped eating, and for the first time that evening, I didn't smile. My name is Elena. I'm 34, married for 7 years, and until that point, I was the woman everyone described as reasonable, calm, easy to work with, and easy to overlook. I earned more than my husband, covered most of our expenses, and still somehow felt like a guest in my own marriage. That was especially true because of his mother, Marina, who believed my income was a family asset she had the right to manage. That dinner began like many others before it. Her apartment smelled of overcooked chicken and lemon cleaner. The table was set too formally, almost as if we were strangers trying to impress each other. Marina asked questions that sounded polite but carried an edge. The kind you don't notice at first, but think about later. She looked at me and said, "So, Elena, are bonuses still unpredictable?" Her eyes briefly shifted to my purse. "It must be stressful not knowing how much extra money you actually have." I responded calmly, as I always did. I said my job was stable. I said I was grateful. I didn't mention that my income paid for the car we arrived in, the vacation she proudly talked about, or the medical bill she had quietly passed to my husband the previous month. Then she gave a soft, knowing laugh. Turning to my husband, she said, "At least her income can support the family when needed. That's what wives are for." At that moment, something became clear to me. I looked directly at my husband, not at her, but at him, and spoke in a calm, steady tone. I told him that if his mother made one more comment about my salary, it would be the end of any polite discussion. I made it clear that I would address things myself, from boundaries to finances to ownership. He didn't respond. He simply reached for his glass of water, avoiding eye contact. Marina smiled as if she had already succeeded. That's when I understood the situation was never really about dinner. It never had been. And I was done waiting for him to take a position. On the drive home, the city lights passed in a blur beyond the windshield, and my husband remained silent. Silence carries weight when it's intentional. I watched his hands tighten around the steering wheel, expecting him to defend me, or at least recognize what had happened. He didn't. Instead, he exhaled and said, "You didn't have to make it awkward." Awkward. Not humiliating, not intrusive, just awkward. That was when the pattern became clear. Marina had always presented her remarks as concern. Questions about my generosity, suggestions about helping family, comments about how my job was more fortunate than his. And each time he would smooth it over, telling me she didn't mean anything by it. He told me to ignore it, to accept that family is family. But family doesn't send late-night payment requests. Family doesn't forward renovation estimates for later. Family doesn't treat my income as if it were an inheritance. That night, lying awake beside him, I realized the pressure wasn't random. It was deliberate, and I had been the only one choosing not to see it. The first clear shift came a week later, presented as something practical. Over coffee, my husband casually mentioned that his mother was thinking about downsizing. He said it like it was a neutral update, like discussing the weather. Then he added that she was wondering if we could help cover the difference for a few months. The word "we" didn't sit right. I asked how much. He hesitated, and that pause gave me my answer before he even spoke. When he finally said the number, it matched almost exactly my monthly net income, not savings, not extra, mine. I let out a short, sharp laugh. "And you agreed to this?" I asked. He frowned and said we would talk about it. But by then, I understood that talking was often just the first step toward agreement. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed our shared accounts. The small transactions I had previously ignored now formed a clear pattern. Utility bills I didn't use, subscriptions I never approved, and transfers labeled as miscellaneous gifts. It wasn't a single major betrayal. It was a series of small, repeated ones that had been normalized over time. The worst part was that he assumed I would never look into it. The humiliation didn't stay private. It rarely does. The following Sunday, Marina hosted a birthday lunch with extended family, neighbors, and people who appreciated appearances more than honesty. I wore a simple dress, kept a neutral expression, and chose to observe. I watched, listened, and quietly assessed the room. Partway through dessert, Marina stood and raised her glass. I just want to thank Elena, she said warmly, her tone polished, for being such a supportive wife. Some women forget that money isn't theirs alone after marriage. Light laughter followed, polite, approving. My husband smiled. He actually smiled. In that moment, something in me shifted, not dramatic, but precise and final. When I looked around the table, no one met my eyes. I wasn't being seen as a person, but as a role, as a resource being acknowledged in public. I stood and lifted my own glass. To clarity, I said calmly, because misunderstandings grow when people assume access they were never actually given. The room went still. Marina's smile faded. My husband leaned in and whispered, "Sit down." I didn't. And that was the moment everyone understood I would no longer stay silent. I didn't cry afterward, which surprised me the most. At home, I showered, changed, and sat on the edge of the bed while my husband paced, explaining tone, intent, embarrassment, everything except responsibility. His words passed by me like background noise. I was already focused elsewhere. Calm doesn't appear suddenly. It settles once a decision is made. I opened my laptop again, not out of anger, but with precision. I listed everything: my income, my contributions, the accounts I funded, and the access I had casually allowed because trust once felt easier than formal structure. I reviewed messages I had ignored, requests I had responded to with silence instead of refusal. That's when I understood that my silence had been taken as permission, so I corrected it. I contacted my bank and separated the accounts. I arranged meetings. I updated authorizations. I drafted a single email, polite, direct, and unemotional, clearly outlining boundaries and expectations for reimbursement. No accusations, just facts. Resolution doesn't require noise, it requires timing. When I finally looked up, my husband was watching me as if he had just realized I spoke a language he had never tried to understand. I gave a small, composed smile. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm handling it." The first call came 3 days later. Marina's voice was overly sweet. "Elena, dear, there seems to be an issue with the transfer this month." I let the silence linger just long enough to make a point. "There isn't," I replied. "The access was temporary. It has now been corrected." She paused. "But we were relying on that money." "I understand," I said evenly. "That's why I sent the email. Future expectations require agreement. Past withdrawals require resolution." Her tone shifted, slightly strained. "You're overreacting." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being precise." That evening, my husband confronted me, holding documents, confusion mixed with concern. "You didn't tell me you were doing all this." I met his gaze. "I did warn you." He hesitated, then said, "Mom is upset." "I'm sure," I replied calmly. "She's not used to accountability." The next day, a repayment request reached her inbox, itemized, dated, and clear. That's when the tone changed. Not anger, concern. Concern tends to make people less careful. Marina stopped contacting me directly and went through my husband instead. Long messages, voice notes, emotion. She claimed I was humiliating her, that families shouldn't keep records, that good wives don't embarrass elders. For the first time, those words didn't reach me through him, because I had already removed myself from that dynamic. One night, he came home late, visibly tired. "She says she'll tell everyone you're greedy, that you're breaking the family apart." I nodded. "She already did, publicly, during the toast, you remember." He sat down heavily as if something had finally given way. "She says if we don't fix this, she might have to sell the apartment." "That's her decision," I said gently. The calmness in my voice seemed to catch him off guard. When the repayment deadline passed, I didn't follow up emotionally. I forwarded the documentation to a lawyer I had consulted quietly weeks earlier, not to escalate, but to formalize. A letter was delivered to Marina's door. After that, everyone wanted private conversations, especially my husband. The outcome wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. Marina didn't call, argue, or apologize. She paid, quietly and in full, because the legal review revealed something she hadn't expected me to notice. Years of financial support routed through my accounts carried tax implications she couldn't risk exposing. My money hadn't just been convenient, it had been shielding her. When my husband finally sat across from me and truly looked at me, his voice broke slightly. "You could have ruined her." I shook my head. "No. I gave her a choice." He asked if we were okay. That was the final point of clarity. "I warned you," I said gently. "Not her, you." I moved out 2 weeks later, calmly, financially stable, and legally clear. Marina lost access. My husband lost the comfort of avoiding the issue, and I gained something I hadn't had in years: control without hostility. Money exposes entitlement, boundaries reveal character, and I understood exactly who they were the moment I stopped being useful.